Sports Talk. I'm your host, Old Man Nate, and today we are live again at Twin Peaks in Oklahoma City, 6500 Southwest 3rd. Come on down and watch the OU game with Old Man Nate. They take on the BYU Cougars today at 11 a.m. Central Time. Like I said, come on down to Twin Peaks where they have great food, great drinks, and great scenic views. Um, Lunch will be starting here in about an hour, about game time. So come on down where you can get you some chicken fried steak, a salad, a burger, some tacos, some nachos, you name it, they got it. So come on down to Twin Peaks and get you some great eats and then get you a cold beer on tap. They got the coldest beer in town. So come on down Twin Peaks and watch the game with Old Man Nate. So first we're gonna talk about today we're gonna talk about a couple things. We're gonna talk about the OU and BYU breakdown. I'm be honest with you, I'm not gonna go over this very much, and there's a reason for that. The biggest topic today we're gonna have is we're gonna talk about the Big 12 championship tiebreaker scenario. What has to happen? I'll be honest with you, it's too hard to be able to calculate every single scenario that would have to happen for OU to get in. But I am going to talk about the big ones. Okay, what first of all, OU's got to win. That's an obvious one. But we'll talk about all of the things. So if you're joining us right now, please leave some comments. Just say hi. Let me know you're in, and that way, I like to communicate with my fans. So, first of all, I did my top 25 earlier this week, and it was pretty close to the committees. Not 100%. Like I had Tennessee at 25. The committee got them at 18. Utah, I had at 24. The committee had them at 22. We both had Oklahoma State at 23. I had Kansas at 22. They had them at 25. We both had Kansas State at 21, North Carolina at 20. I had Tulane at 19. They got them at 24. I had Iowa at 18. They got them at 16. We both had Arizona at 17. I had Ole Miss at 16. They got them up to 13. I had Notre Dame at 15. They got them at 19. I had LSU at 14. They got them at 15. So almost identical there. Penn State, I had 13. They got them at 12. I had Oklahoma at 12. They got them at 14. So those three right there, just, a couple places from each other. Missouri, I had 11. They got them in the top 10 at 9. I had Oregon State at 10. They got them just outside the top 10 at 11. I had Louisville at 9. They got them at 10. And then Alabama at 8. We both had Texas at 7. We both had Oregon at 6. Now this week I made a switch in my top 4 I switched Washington and Florida State, where the committee didn't. I had Florida State at 5 and Washington at 4. They had their Florida State at 4 and Washington at 5. And then our top 3 are identical: Michigan 3, Ohio State 2, and Georgia jumped in at top number 1 for this week for me too. All right. Quick games this week. Now, just to break it down. By the way, none of us had anybody from the top 25 drop out last week from the week before to this week. So had people drop places but not drop out of the top 25. ACC had 3 teams in: Big 10 4, Big 12 5, Pac-12 5, SEC 6, and then there was 2 independent or non-Power 5 teams. That's Notre Dame and Tulane. Okay. So big games this week. You got tonight. You got number 14 LSU, and they're playing. Well, I'm just going to tell you the ranked teams who they're playing. Not all of them big games. Okay. LSU is going to take on Georgia State at 7. Ohio State, number 2, Ohio State is going to take on Minnesota. Number 1, Georgia, and number 25, Tennessee. At 25, Tennessee, 2:30. Michigan plays Maryland at 11. Florida State North Alabama at 5:30. Oregon at Arizona State tonight. Or actually, I'm not sure what time that is. I didn't get the game time on that one. Penn State against Rutgers at 11. Oklahoma State at Houston at 3. Oklahoma against BYU here at 11. Arizona against 24 Utah. So there's the top 25 ranking game. Iowa against Illinois at 2:30. Alabama and Chattanooga at 11. Ole Miss, Louisiana Monroe at 11. Louisville at Miami at 11. That'll be a good game. Tulane, Florida Atlantic at 11. Notre Dame, Wake Forest at 2:30. North Carolina and Clemson at 2:30. Kansas State and Kansas tonight at 6. Washington and Oregon State. That's a top 10 matchup. Number 4 Washington at number 10 Oregon State. That's tonight at 6:30. Missouri and Florida at 6:30, and Texas at Iowa State at 7:00. That's going to be a big game for the Big 12. So let me before we get into this Big 12 scenario, roughly talk about Oklahoma and BYU, and I'm going to tell you like this: if OU doesn't beat BYU by at least 30 points today, then they don't even deserve to be in the Big 12 championship scenario. BYU is the worst team in the Big 12. Now, I understand by records wise or not, Cincinnati only has 1 win and there's several teams with 2, but by stats wise, it's not even close. BYU offense and defense are both ranked over 100. All right. OU's got a pretty good top 50 defense, a top 10 offense. So this should be I understand they're getting their quarterback back, but he's not that big of a deal. So it should be just like last week where OU put it on West Virginia. It should be the exact same scenario to this week. The only thing here's the only thing. Sorry. Here's the only thing that scares me. One, hey, if you're watching, let me know how everything's going because I just got a thing on my internet was running low. So let me know if audio or video is not working very well. Okay, put it in the comments. So yeah, this is an early game, and it's 11:00 game for OU. However, out there where they're playing at in Provo, Utah, it is 10:00 in the morning. So that means everything is bumped up. I mean, we're OU's used to 11 a.m. games. That's what we've been playing all season. We only 2 games this season have not been 11 a.m. No, 3. I take it back, 3 games. We played OSU at 2:30, played SMU at 5, and we played West Virginia last week at 6. So other than that, everything else has been 11 a.m. kickoff. So we're used to that. However, it's a little bit earlier than that. So it kind of scares me a little bit. But the only other way that BYU has a chance in this game is to get turnovers. So as long as OU takes care of the ball, they play like they did last week. This should not even be a ball game. They should be running them out of their own place. Now it's going to be rowdy, even at 11 a.m. It's going to be rowdy out there in Provo. So Sooners can handle that. They've been on the road. They went to Cincinnati. They won. They've been to Dallas, played Texas and won. They didn't handle it too well in Lawrence and in Stillwater. But actually, I thought they played pretty decent in Stillwater. And in Lawrence, they didn't play very well. But in Stillwater, I thought they played pretty well. Just kind of got hosed by some officials. So, anyways, that's why I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this game because it doesn't matter. We are way better than BYU. Again, we should do to them what we did to West Virginia last week. We do that, and it's an easy win. All right. So now let's move on to really the hot topic in the last week and the Big 12 tiebreaker scenarios. So just to give you the Big 12 standings right now, the teams are really involved with this tiebreaker scenario. We got Texas is 6-1 in the conference, 9-1 overall. Oklahoma State 5-2, 7-3 overall. OU 5-2, 8-2 overall. Iowa State 5-2, 6-4 overall, and Kansas State 5-2, 7-3 overall. Now, the reason I'm not going any lower than that is because it with 2 games left to go in conference play, almost impossible for anybody else to even jump into the tiebreaker scenario. It would have to be like OSU, OU, Iowa State, Kansas State, all would have to lose one more game in the next 2 weeks to bring anybody else into the tiebreaker scenario. So I'm not bringing anybody else right this second in. Okay. Um, what would really get interesting is if Iowa State beats Texas tonight. If Iowa State beats Texas, that means let's say Iowa State beats Texas and OU and OSU and Kansas State all win today. That means Texas, OSU, OU, Iowa State, and Kansas State would all be tied for the 2 spots to go to the Big 12 championship. That would be crazy. And Kansas State and Iowa State would be playing each other, so one of them would be eliminated. So that means there would be a possibility of 4 teams being tied at the end of regular season, and only 2 of them could go. So what? And let's take a look at what the teams play. So who plays who? So Texas, as I mentioned, has to play at Ames, Iowa tonight, and then next week they host. I believe it's Black Friday. They're going to host Texas Tech at 6:30. Oklahoma State plays at Houston today at 3 o'clock, and then next week host BYU. OU plays at BYU today at 11, and then next Friday, Black Friday, they host TCU at 11. Iowa State, as we said earlier, hosts Texas tonight at 7, and then next week plays at Kansas State. No game time yet, but this next Saturday, they'll play Kansas State. And then Kansas State today plays at Kansas. Tonight plays at Kansas at 6 o'clock. And then next week host Iowa State. Again, no game time. So all of these teams have one road game and one home game. And 4 out of the 5 teams are playing on the road today. The only one that's not, of course, is Iowa State, who's hosting Texas. So there's still some games to be played. All of this stuff about tiebreaker scenarios may not even need to come and play. At the end of the day, there could be, Texas could finish 8-1, and one of the other teams could finish 7-2, and then everybody, the other 3 all finish with a loss, and then so no tiebreaker scenario is needed, right? Or even if 2 of them finish at 7-2 and 3 don't, then you still got the 2 in. It would just be the tiebreaker scenario and determine who's the number 1 seed and who's the number 2 seed. Okay, but they both would be in. So let's talk about, well, before we get any further, again, for those of you who are watching right now, if you're not down here hanging out with old man Nate, you're in the wrong spot. So get in your car, drive on down here to Twin Peaks, 6500 Southwest 3rd in Oklahoma City. Get you some lunch. I'm going to have some lunch here. When the game starts, I'll get me something to eat. I'm going to have a few beers, going to have a few tall ones. And then, I'm going to enjoy the game. All right. So yeah. Come on down here, hanging out with old man Nate. Get you some nachos. Get you some wings. They do got wings here. In fact, I like their wings better than Buffalo Wild Wings and some of these other places. Okay, so come on down, hang out with old man Nate. So tiebreaker rules. Here's what I'm gonna read this word for word. Okay, in the event of a tie between more than two teams, the following procedures will be used. After one team has an advantage and is seeded, all remaining teams in the multiple team tiebreaker will repeat the multiple team tie-breaking procedure. If at any time teams, the two-team tie live. All right. So another one, and on the two-team tie-breaking scenario, it's going to start off with head-to-head. If they played each other, that's where it's going to start. If they didn't play each other, then it will follow the steps as the two multiple team tie-breaking scenarios. Okay. So here's step one: head-to-head best cumulative winning percentage in games among tied teams. Every tied team has not played each other. Go if every tied team has not played each other, go to step two. However, they made an amendment today or this week to clarify that rule. That amendment to step one reads as follows: if all the tied teams are not common opponents, the tied team that defeated each of the other tied teams earns the championship berth. All right. So what that means? So, and they brought up the scenario. And here's the thing: the Big 12. This is how shady they are looking right now. They are already uh, pro- projecting scenarios to happen. Right? We mentioned it could be 5-team race between Texas, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, and Kansas State. They changed the wording to benefit one scenario and one scenario only. And that was Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and Kansas State. So originally, remember it said here, if if every tied team has not played each other, go to step two. All right. Again, the scenario was Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and Kansas State. Oklahoma and Kansas State did not play each other this year. So by amending that last sentence right there, it clarified that Oklahoma State would get the berth if those were the three teams left, right? Because Oklahoma State did beat both OU and Kansas State this year. So they're trying to force their way in with Kansas or Oklahoma State. That's what they're trying to do. Um, but we're going to go through the scenario process and see if the Sooners really do have a chance to make it to the Big 12 championship, even if they win out. All right. So we already went over step one. Step two, the record against the next higher placed common opponent in the standings, conference by conference record. Okay. Step three, winning percentage against all common conference opponents must be common among all teams involved in the tie. All right. Step four, combine winning percentage in conference games of conference opponents. In other words, their strength of schedule in conference. Okay. Number five, total number of wins in a 12 game season. Now, they can include one FCS win, but no more than that. Okay. So like, well, actually, yeah, I think OSU. I forget. I think they did beat an FCS team, so it would count. Okay, and then after that, step 6 is highest ranked team, and if we're still tied at, at step 7, it would be a coin toss. All right, I don't think that would happen. The highest ranked team would probably settle it right there, and honestly, step 5 would right now would settle it. Okay, at the latest. Okay, so we're gonna go over this. Um, so what if scenarios? Okay, I've got 4 scenarios here that we're gonna talk about. And again, hey, if you're watching, hey, let me know what you think. Tell me, tell me what your thoughts are when when we're talking about these. Okay, again, before we get into scenarios, again, if you're not at Twin Peaks at 6500 Southwest 3rd, Oklahoma City, you're in the wrong spot. So come on down here to Twin Peaks. Enjoy the game with old man Nate. We'll be starting here. The game will be coming on here in a little over 30 minutes. And we're going to talk about, or we're going to watch OU demolish BYU today. It's not even going to be a close game. The only reason I'm watching because I'm an OU fan. It's not going to be a good football game. I promise you that. Not today, it ain't. All right. So we got 4 different scenarios we're going to talk about. The first 2 we're going to talk about are pretty, pretty, pretty easy to um, eliminate teams. So let's get those out of the way really quick. The first scenario is if if Texas finishes at 8-1, OSU, OU, and Kansas State finish at 7-2. Texas would automatically be in there. Obviously, they got the 8-1 record, and then like I just mentioned it, right? If OSU, OU, and Kansas State all finish tied at 7-2, then OSU gets in because of the amendment they made uh, this week that would put OSU in over OU and Kansas State because OSU beat OU and Kansas State, even though all 3 teams did not play each other. By the way, in this scenario, OU, OSU, and Texas went out, and Kansas State beats Kansas and Iowa State. Okay, so again, OU, OSU, and Kansas State went out, and Iowa State would lose 2 games. They would lose to Texas and Kansas State. Okay, this next scenario, I'm going to go out. Texas, OSU, and OU went out. Iowa State loses to Texas but beats Kansas State. Okay. Texas, with this scenario, Texas would finish 8-1, OSU would finish 7-2, and OU would finish 7-2. Texas again is automatically in at 8-1, and then it would be only 2 teams tied for second. So in that scenario, it would go to the tiebreaker rules with 2 teams, and it would because OSU beat OU in head to head, OSU would finish in second and get the Big 12 berth. So it'd be Texas and OSU. So in both of those scenarios I gave, OSU and Texas would be playing for the Big 12 championship. All right. Now we got a little bit more complicated, um, scenarios. But before we get further, let me take a break. I got to get a drink. So let me see if I can get somebody to get me a drink real quick. But so let me. So for those of you watchers, give me 1 second. I got to get something to drink. Okay. 1 second. All right, I'm back. Okay. All right, Sooner. So these next two scenarios are a little bit more complicated. We're going to talk about, and honestly, these two scenarios I'm going to talk about are probably more likely what's going to happen. Okay, which makes everything more complicated. All right, here comes my drink. So hold on one second. Good. All right, thank you. Feel better now. All right. So these next two scenarios really are very identical. All right, thank you. It's just about one game difference, okay? About who's going to win next week between Kansas State and Iowa State. Because I mentioned this week, if Iowa State beats Texas, you're going to have 5 teams going in next week, all tied at 6-2, and tied for the Big 12 championship or the Big 12 lead. 4 of those teams aren't playing each other. You know, Texas don't play none of the other ones. Oklahoma don't play none of the other ones. Oklahoma State don't play any of the other ones. Or 3 of them don't play. I'm sorry. But the last 2 do. Kansas State and Iowa State play each other. So the winner of that one, you know, they're going to finish 7-2. The loser will finish 6-3. So it's really about who wins that game that will determine if that happens this week. If Iowa State beats Texas, then you're probably looking at 4 teams at the end of the regular season tied. And then you're going to bring in the tiebreaker scenarios, which is going to get crazy. And it's going to piss some people off, all right? Because you're going to be left out. I mean, I honestly, and you can't blame it on, I mean, OU's going to blame it on the officials in the OSU game. But other than that, unless, like, let's say Iowa State gets a lot of home cooking tonight from the officials, then Texas is going to blame it on the officials in Iowa State law, right? But let's go over the scenarios now. Remember, we're going to go over each by step. So step 1, head-to-head best cumulative winning percentage in games among tied teams If every tied team has not played each other, go to step 2. But we got the amendment also where it says if all the tied teams are not common opponents, the tied team that defeated each of the other tied teams wins the championship berth, right? So in this scenario, we got OU, Texas, OSU, and Kansas State all finishing 7-2, where Kansas State, OU, and OSU win out. Texas loses to Iowa State, and then Iowa State loses to Kansas State. Okay. So OU, so in this scenario, step 1 could not be used. All right. Because OU would have beat Texas but lost to OSU and didn't play Kansas State. Texas lost to OSU. OU didn't play OSU but beat Kansas State. OSU beat OU, didn't play Texas, but lost. Um, no, they beat Kansas State, but they only beat 2 of the. Well, yeah, they didn't beat all of them. They didn't beat all the teams, so they could not automatically get in. And Kansas State, like I said, didn't play OU, lost to Texas, and lost to OSU. Okay. So we go to step 2. Step 2 is record against an opponent in the standings, conference records. So if Kansas State beats Iowa State next week, then the common opponent between the 4 teams with the highest ranked common opponent team would be Iowa State. Okay. Iowa State played Texas, OU, OSU, and Kansas State. Of course, the last 2 coming today and the next week. We don't know the results on those yet, but we're all given, this is all assumptions, right? Also, the reason it wouldn't be Kansas is because in this scenario, Kansas State wins out. That means tonight they beat Kansas. That's another loss for Kansas. Okay. So, according to our scenario, Texas loses to Iowa State. OU's already beat Iowa State. OSU's already lost to Iowa State. And Kansas State would have beat Iowa State. Okay. So we have 2 teams, but those 2 teams that are left didn't play each other. So we got to go to step 3. Okay. Step 3, winning percentage against all common conference opponents must be common among all teams involved in the tie. Again, we're down to OU and Kansas State because they're the 2 that beat Iowa State. All right. So in step 3, Kansas State beat, or by the way, there's only 2 common teams that all 4 teams played. Okay. And that would be Kansas and Iowa State. All right. Now I let me look real quick to see if Kansas State played any more because it might be a little further than that. I forgot that we're down to 2 teams now. Let me look real quick here to see again. Let's take a look. UCF can be thrown in there. TCU, Texas. Okay, so when you're down to 2 teams, yeah, there'll be a lot more teams. So let's look here real quick then. And we already got Kansas, we got Texas, we got TCU, we got OSU, and UCF. All right, so OU won, lost. We're putting the wins. win. Okay. And then, so let's take a look at what Kansas State did. Texas, they lost. Yeah. Um, Kansas, we're saying they win. We got Texas, TCU, they won. OSU, they lost. And UCF, they won. The winning percent, let's see here. They went 1, 2, 2-1, 3-1, 3-2, 4-2. OU went 0-1, 1-1, 2-1, 3-1, 3. They both went 4-2, so they would move on to step 4. Combined winning percentage in conference games of conference opponents or the strength of schedule. Now, this is the complicated portion of the whole thing. All right, because the Big 12 hasn't come out and said how they determine the strength of schedule. And what I mean by that is for instance, right now, okay, I'm going to pull this up to make it easier to review real quick. All right, so right now, you got Texas by themselves at 6-1, but you got Oklahoma State, OU, Iowa State, Kansas State all at 5-2. Then you got West Virginia, Texas Tech, Kansas all at 4-3. TCU, Houston, Baylor, BYU, and UCF all at 2-5, and Cincinnati by themselves at 1-6. Now, the tiebreaker scenario for these people that are all tied with the same record, multiple teams, is not. None of these have just 2 teams. All right. The least amount is West Virginia, Texas Tech, and Kansas State all at 4-3. Everybody else, there's multiple. So, 4 or 5. So, how do they determine which one is the higher ranked one and all that? Okay. So, I did my point system on 2 different ways. Number one way was if you're finished last, you get 1 point. Finish first, you get 14 points. Okay. And you just fill it in that way. But again, in those middle grounds, because 1 point can make a difference. The second way I did it was if you finished last, you got 1 point. If you were everybody that's 2 and 5 got 2 points. Everybody that was 4 and 3 got 3 points. And everybody that's 5 and 2 got 4 points. Okay. And well, in our tiebreaker scenarios, nobody would be by themselves. So I don't know how they're doing it, but I did it like that. And at the end of the day, we determined that in Kansas State would have the better, get the number 1 seed. They ended up with more points than, in both ways I did it, they ended up with more points than Oklahoma. Okay. So Kansas State, and if OU, Texas, OSU, and Kansas State all finished at 7-2 and tied amongst the Big 12, I got Kansas State getting the number 1 seed. Now, going into now you got to go back and get the number 2 seed. Well, it's pretty much already common sense that would tell you, well, if OU and Kansas State were tied, then the other one's going to be Oklahoma. And you're right. So OU would get the number 2 seed, and Kansas State and OU would play in the Big 12 championship. All right. But let's say that Iowa State beats Texas tonight, but loses to Kansas State next weekend, which beats Kansas State next weekend. Okay. So you got OU, OSU, and Iowa State winning out, beating both Texas and Kansas State this weekend, and Texas losing to Iowa State. Will you still have the same OU, Texas, and Oklahoma State at 7-2, and Iowa State would replace Kansas State in your tiebreaker scenario? You go through the steps the same way, okay? Remember, again, head-to-head, best cumulative winning percentage in games among tied teams. If all the tied teams are not common opponents, the tied team that defeated each of the other tied teams earns the championship berth. So again, we have Texas, OU, OSU, and Iowa State. Well, Texas beat or lost to OU, did not play OSU, and beat Iowa State. So they're 1-1-1. OU beat Texas, lost to OSU, but beat Iowa State. So they're 2-1. OSU didn't play Texas, beat OU, lost to Iowa State. So again, they're 1-1-1. And Iowa State lost to Texas, lost to OU, but beat OSU. So they'd finish 1-2. So nobody won all them. You got to move on to step 2. Now, here's the difference. Because Kansas State is not a common. Remember, okay, before I get ahead of myself, step 2 is record against the next higher placed common opponent in the standings by conference record. Kansas State is not a common opponent because OU didn't play him. So the next highest common opponent among all 4 teams, there's only one, and that is Kansas. Okay. Against Kansas, Texas beat Kansas. OU lost to Kansas. OSU beat Kansas. Iowa State lost to Kansas. So now we're down to 2 teams, Texas and OSU. Those 2 teams, like OU and Kansas State, did not play each other. So we got to move on to step 3. In step 3, winning percentage against all common conference opponents must be common among all teams involved in the tie. So between Texas, I'm going to have to do this again because I actually did over 4 teams for some reason. Texas and OSU. Let's take a look to see who Texas played this year. Let's see here. They played Baylor, Kansas, OU. That's one common opponent I know. Houston. Oh, that's one common opponent I know because OSU's playing Houston today. BYU, that's a common opponent because OSU play BYU next week. I believe Kansas State's a common opponent. TCU, I'm not sure about. Iowa State and Texas Tech. I don't think Texas Tech is one. So let's go back here. Let's see if OSU. Yep, they played Iowa State. ISU. Kansas State. Kansas. Cincinnati. OU. We didn't play UCF. Houston. BYU. They had a lot of common opponents. So TCU's out. BYU's in there. Houston's in there. OU's in there. Kansas is in there. Baylor's out. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. So now let's take a look how the teams do. So OSU. Now we're predicting that they'll beat BYU. Remember that. So win. We're predicting they'll beat Houston today. So win. They beat OU. Kansas. They beat Kansas State. They beat, and Iowa State. They lost. So they beat them all, but Iowa State. Okay. Texas, on the other hand, well, so far, yeah. Well, they lost to OU. We're predicting to lose to Iowa State. So that right there tells you. So OSU would get the number 1 seed. And then Texas would get the number 2 seed. Just that simple. All right. We're 10 minutes before kickoff here in Provo, Utah. We're at Twin Peaks at 6500 Southwest 3rd in Oklahoma City. Come on down to Twin Peaks and watch the game with Old Man Nate. We watch OU demolish BYU today. That's what's going to happen. I'm telling you right now. If it doesn't happen, all this tiebreaker scenario stuff is garbage for OU. You don't deserve to be talked about. Okay? BYU is the worst team in the Big 12, stats-wise. Not even close. All right? So, yeah, come on down. We'll get you some great food. We'll have some lunch later on. Get you some great drinks. We got some great beer on tap. 28-degree draft beer. They got the game, all the games on all the TVs. I don't know how many TVs they got here. Probably 50 TVs. They got a lot. So come on down. Watch the OU game with Old Man Nate. So here we go. We got it broke down for you guys. What has to happen for the Sooners to make the Big 12 championship? There may be, obvious. Okay, let's put it this way. The obvious one is OU went out and OSU, Kansas State, and Iowa State all lose another game. All right. That would leave OU and Texas, the two top teams in the conference. That's the easiest scenario. Could that happen? Yeah. I mean, OSU to me has the easiest schedule left. They have to play at Houston today. That's not a tough game, but I'll say this. The performance they put on last week makes it seem like, well, anything's possible, right? If OSU is forced to throw the ball, then I think they're in trouble. But Houston's offense is not very good either. Now, OSU's defense is terrible, but OSU's offense is not very good. I mean, Houston's offense is not very good. So I just find it hard for them to win today. Hard for Houston to win. But yeah, Kansas State and Iowa State, one of them is going to eliminate each other. And then if Kansas beats Kansas State today, and then Kansas State beats Iowa State, then you're down to 3 teams, and that's a very, very good possibility. Texas, OU, and OSU. And that's not the scenario that OU wants because they're out. Getting into, Iowa State or Kansas State winning out, and Texas not losing tonight, that's a bad scenario for the Sooners there too, because Texas winning out automatically puts them in, and that leaves a 3-way tie between OSU, Kansas State, and OU, and that's the scenario that the Big 12 set up to make sure that OSU was in. Remember what the amendment said. If all the tied teams are not common opponents, the tied team that defeated each of the other tied teams earns the championship berth. Now, why is that significant? Because It originally read, if every tied team has not played each other, go to step 2. And OU, OSU, and Kansas State, OU and Kansas State didn't play each other. So according to the original amendment, original tiebreaker, you're supposed to move on to step 2. But they came in and said, well, wait a minute, hold on. We did have one team that did play both the other 2 teams, so they should get that berth. You know, I'm sure Kansas State's a little heated about it too, because it automatically eliminates them. So, but OSU is jumping for joy. Now, if Iowa State beats Texas and Kansas State next week, that puts OSU and Texas in the Big 12 championship, according to our Big 12 tiebreaker scenario. So three scenarios so far. We got OSU in the Big 12 championship. Matter of fact, 3 scenarios we have OSU and Texas in the Big 12 championship. There's only one scenario left that gives OU a chance, and it actually eliminates both OSU and Texas. And that is OSU went out, or Kansas State, OU, and OSU went out. Texas loses to Iowa State tonight. So Iowa State beats Texas tonight. And then Iowa State loses to Kansas State next week. That scenario would put Kansas State and OU in the Big 12 championship. And I think that's the only way that OU can get in. So Sooner fans, they got to be Cyclone fans tonight, which we normally are anyway, right? We normally don't root against Texas and anything. So no change up there. But the only other, your only 2 options are Kansas State or OU went out and Iowa State beat Texas but lose to Kansas State, or if Texas beats Iowa State tonight, they need Iowa State then to beat Kansas State next week, and they need Oklahoma State to lose either this week to Houston or BYU next week. If that happens, then OU and Texas would. Once again, I appreciate all you guys dialing in today. It looks like there's not very strong internet. I'll restart my computer when I log off, and hopefully by the end of halftime, we'll be back on at halftime to talk about the game. Hopefully it's a route. Hopefully it's already 35-0 at halftime, and we can just talk, further about the Big 12 tiebreaker. But enjoy the game today. But if you're not enjoying it at Twin Peaks, you are missing out. Come on down here at Twin Peaks at 6500 Southwest 3rd in Oklahoma City, where you can enjoy great eats, great drinks, and great scenic views while watching the game. All right, I'm going to be having lunch here in a little bit, and I'm going to be having to throw them back a few Dos Equis. And come on down here and enjoy the game with me. I'd love to hang out with you. I'm in the caveman room, they call it. So come on back here and enjoy the game with me. We'll be back again. We'll be back on at halftime. And today, Sooner fans, for y'all just joined in, you need to be Cyclone fans. All right. Like I said, there's only 2 ways OU gets in the Big 12 championship. Everybody loses, or Texas. And by everybody, I'm talking about Iowa State, Kansas State, and Oklahoma State. Okay. So if Texas wins out and Texas beats Iowa State tonight, then Iowa State beats Kansas State next week, and Oklahoma State somehow loses to Houston or BYU, then Texas and OU, and of course OU has to win out, then Texas and OU play in the Big 12 championship with no tiebreaker scenario. But if Iowa State beats Texas tonight, then now another possibility, okay, is Kansas to beat Kansas State tonight, and then Iowa and Texas still beat Iowa State, but then Iowa State beat Texas or Kansas State next weekend, along with the OSU losing. And then it's still same OU and Texas in there. But if we root for Texas to win tonight, then Iowa State or Kansas State to beat Iowa State next weekend. Then with the scenarios with 4 teams still tied, with OU, Texas, OSU, and Kansas State tied, by the tiebreaker scenario, Kansas State and OU would play in the Big 12 championship. All right. So, anyways, appreciate you guys dialing in. I'm going to log off now. The game's about to come on. Boomer Sooner, guys. And I'll be back on at halftime. So log back on to Old Man Sports Talk at halftime and watch the halftime show. Thanks again for watching Old Man Sports Talk.